Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and in today's video, we are going to be reviewing The Sandcastle by Iris Murdoch. My brain blanked on her name for a second, but before we dive into that review, it is the beginning of a new month, and so let's chat some TBR lists. So this is what I have for August. And I have a couple of books missing from this stack because they're on my bedside table and I just forgot to grab them. But there's some wiggle room in here because we'll get into that. I'm waiting on some books in the mail. So Black Swans by Eve Babbitt has been pushed twice now to the preceding TBR list just because I've had other things that have either popped up or books that took longer to read than I expected. So Black Swans, priority. I'm currently reading Paul right now by Daisy Lafarge, which is going to filter in probably to the first week of August, and then right after that, I am picking up Black Swans. Finally. I read 2 thick books in July and June. Q1084 and Lorna Doone. So I'm going shorter in the month of August. You'll see that's a trend. I'm going shorter. Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, just under 400 pages. Will not take me long to get through it all. Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. One of my very good friends. We made a deal. This is one of his favorite books. John, if you're watching this, I know you're watching this. One of his favorite books. So I said I will read Sorrow and Bliss. We made a pact if he reads Stoner by John Williams, one of my favorite books. So this cover is just so good. So I have that in the queue. I'm going to read that right after I finish Black Swans. Neither of those books is going to take me long to get through. Dorothy Dunnett. The Game of Kings. I'm starting this one finally. Not going to take me long to get through. I don't think it's under 600 pages, but I'm a pretty fast reader, and I think once I get into the groove of that, I'll be okay. This book, I did purchase a companion guide because that way I can kind of reference some of the pieces of literature that she's referencing. It translates certain things because she makes you work, which I don't mind. So, and I think that'll help me kind of get into the groove of what she's doing. So I'm excited to have that one standby as I read the book. Books that I have that are filtering over from July. If On a Night, A Winter's Traveler by Calvino. It's not a short book. My edition is 260 pages long, but it has taken me a lot longer to get through than I thought because it's not necessarily the easiest read. So I'm taking my time with that. But as of the recording of this video, I have maybe 50 pages left, if that. Those 50 pages are going to take some getting through. What else? Catherine of Aragon. Part of Alison Ware's Six Tudor Wives series. So I'm more than halfway through that book as my bedside read. And so it won't take me the whole rest of the month of August to read, to finish it. So, but I'm going to allow that time just in case. I also did leave some wiggle room in here. These aren't long books, minus the Dorothy Dunnett. That one may slow me down a little bit at first, but the others are going to be quick reads for me. I'm anticipating a read in the mail from a publisher that I agreed to, and so I'll squeeze that in before it's published in September. And then there's another one that I agreed to. Both of them just really, I thought were right up my alley. One I'm getting dark academia vibes from, and I like The Secret History, so there's that. So some of those will probably also filter into September. So this is my September tentative list, very tentative. Some of them are absolute yeses. The others I might just shelve for later, and I'll get to them when I get to them. This is a definite yes, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is really probably more appropriate for October, but I'm going to be finishing up Wolf Hall trilogy in October with the last installment. So I'm setting this one for September, and I don't think this will get me that long to get through. I mean, I got through Q1084 in less than 30 days because, unpopular opinion, perhaps, I loved it. I love Q1084. I know people either get on with it, Murakami, or they don't. That book, spoiler alert, 5-star, loved it, couldn't put it down, compulsively readable. It is like, I describe it as 1984 meets The Matrix, but it's magical realism. Loved it. Can't wait to talk about it because it's probably one of my most annotated books. Loved it. So my next bedside read is going to be Elizabeth Taylor's A View of the Harbor. I enjoy Elizabeth Taylor. She's such a cozy writer, and her books are relatively quick reads. I've only read 2 of her novels thus far, so this will be the 3rd, and I'm reading her in publication order. And so she'll be my next bedside read. I'll probably be able to start this in August, but she's in the September pile. These 3 are tentative. I will, if I don't get to them, so I will get to Rules of Civility sometime this year. If not in September, it'll get pushed to October. Again, I have 2 books that I have agreed to read and review, so I'm going to prioritize those over these 3. The Far Cry by Emma Smith. Most likely this will get shelved for later because I wanted to read this when it was super hot outside, but other things kind of piqued my interest more so because it takes place in India. I can shelve it for later. This is a book I will read sometime this year, probably get pushed to October. Love in Other Words, it's just not a priority. I'll get to it when I get to it. Now this one I am definitely reading in September. Thirst for Salt by Madeline Lucas. I recently purchased this book. I was just browsing online and I came across this title and I was like, oh, what's that? I haven't really seen too many people talk about it. It's newly released as of this year. I think it was released in May. So it's pretty hot off the presses. It was definitely released this year. And I was reading reviews online, written reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and people were just blown away by her writing style, and it just sounded like my cup of tea. And I love books that take place by the seaside. And also, I watched a couple of interviews with the author, and she read passages from her book, or either that or the interviewer would read passages from the book. And again, the writing style was just immaculate, so I figured that was up my alley. So, Thirst for Salt. And another reason why I want to read Thirst for Salt was because one of the books that I agreed to take to review also takes place by the sea. And there is another book I ordered that is from a New Zealand author. The name is evading me, but it's a historical fiction taking place largely on the sea. The main character is a sailor, and I love a good tale of the sea. So I feel like there's a theme here. I really need to get One Day to We the Drowned because I just love a good sea story. And that is another reason why I feel like I'm going to get on with Moby Dick. Moby Dick is pinned for 2024 because I love tales of the sea, like I keep saying, like a broken record. And when I was in elementary school, I lived in an area that used to be a whaling area in New England. And so from a young age, the sea was just kind of ingrained into my brain. I've been on old school whaling ships. We had to learn the song Anchors Aweigh in elementary school and performed it in a concert in elementary school. My dad and my mom and I were chuckling about this a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, enough rambling. I'm 8 minutes in. That is what is up on my TBR list for September and August. Maybe some of this is trickling over into October. Let's dive into Iris Murdoch's The Sea. Not The Sea, I'm sorry, The Sandcastle. I have read The Sea somewhere over here. And I enjoyed that. I actually like The Sea better than The Sandcastle, but for different reasons. Because again, I like a good sea tale. But this one is good. And let's dive into it. So this is not my first foray into Iris Murdoch. It's my second. You complain about the narrowness of your life, and yet you never take the chance to do anything new or different. So in The Sandcastle by Iris Murdoch, our main character is a male. His name is Bill Moore, and his life is pretty mundane. He's middle-aged. He has 2 teenage children who act like typical teenagers, kind of listless and a little unfocused, and Their parents have planned for them, but the children are kind of off figuring themselves out. And he and his wife bicker constantly. You can tell that they have been living together for a while, that they've been a married couple for a while, and they bicker more than anything else. His wife is a bit of a nag, I'm not gonna lie. I found her to be a little annoying, but in a good way. And her nagging isn't always unwarranted. You can tell that she's probably frustrated with Bill in some ways. And so Bill also teaches at his son's school. He teaches at an all-male school, and he teaches literature. So a young woman by the name of Rain comes to the school. I'm assuming she's in her 20s. I don't know if we get a definite age, but she is in her 20s is what I'm assuming. She's quite young. She is a painter. Her father was a famous painter. And so she is commissioned by the school to paint a portrait of the school's former headmaster. And Bill falls in love with this young woman. She's a little eccentric because she's a painter. She's free-spirited. She's a successful painter. She lives her life in France. So she is definitely more Parisian than English. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head if she's actually French or if she was just, because she was predominantly raised in France, she's way more French than English is what I think is, her name is Rain, not a French name. So he's actually willing to throw his entire life away to pursue this affair. However, Iris Murdoch uses this conflict and this tension within Bill and this relationship between him and Rain to show how difficult it is to throw away your life, especially a life that has been established for decades. Once you've already been settled down, there are these certain societal conventions that just make that harder to do than necessary. And if you were to do it, it's really not that simple. There are always going to be consequences. And so one of the most repetitive words found throughout this novel is the word freedom. Once Rain comes into Bill's life, he becomes very aware of how predictable and unexciting his life is. So in order to pursue Rain, he makes the decision to act freely. However, through this, Murdoch is revealing that freedom has strings attached, it has consequences, and if it seems like you're making an autonomous choice, what are the consequences? And at what is the boundary between making a choice, saying that you're acting out of free will? Are you really? And what does it mean to be truly free? Can that ever be attained? And when do you start crossing ethical and moral lines? Murdoch is also asking through this, what is freedom? And what can a person do with that supposed freedom? Are there limits? That was a little convoluted. My attention span was actually wavering and I was trying to focus myself. I actually sometimes feel like I have the attention span of a squirrel. So here's some quotes. You say surely freedom is a virtue, and I hesitate to accept this phrase. Let me explain why. To begin with, as I was saying in my talk this evening, freedom needs to be defined. If by freedom we mean absence of external restraint, then we may call a man lucky for being free, but why should we call him good? So within the subject of freedom, there are these questions of fate and lack of will. Because in order to be truly free, does that mean that you are immune from outside circumstances? Is there such a thing as fate then? Is there such a thing as somebody or something's will outside of your control that limits that freedom? And so a lack of will, therefore, when there are forces outside of your control manipulating you, that's the opposite of freedom. This is a theme that we see a lot in ancient Greek myths because the gods have their own will. And so the humans are being manipulated by the gods, thinking that they are acting autonomously and they are not. But also in a way, when you say, okay, well then something is just completely outside of my control. I'm sorry if this seems a little scatterbrained. So if you say that you have freedom, okay, you're assuming you're acting autonomously. There's no such thing as these other forces manipulating your movements and your actions. If you're saying you have a lack of will, then a person is able to absolve their sin. Say, "Oh, it wasn't my fault. I had no agency here. So therefore, my own personal responsibility can be eliminated." And more goes back and forth between these two things of freedom, or do I actually or is there a lack of will here? He sometimes says that he's acting freely, and then sometimes he says things are being left up to fate. More felt, it is fate. It is not our will. We have both struggled against it. But it has been too strong. As he thought this, he answered himself, "No, it is our will." You see him using lack of will or freedom to try to justify his actions, or lack thereof of action in some cases. Moore struggled in his seat. He could not bring himself to get up. A lifetime of conformity was too much for him. He stayed where he was. So from there, the Sandcastle also asked if there are fundamental truths and values, or truth and virtues, Moore does have a sense of right and wrong. And a lot of his morals and ethics stem from a Protestant upbringing. He does not consider himself to be religious, but he can't shake that moral code from his DNA because he's grew up in it. Although he now held no religious views, Moore had been brought up as a Methodist. He believed profoundly in complete truthfulness as the basis and condition of all virtue. But it was some lingering Puritanism out of his rejected childhood which still made him hesitate to become, in the final and technical sense, unfaithful to his wife. "I am only just beginning to develop my own style. My father was such a powerful painter and such a strong personality. I was practically in his image. It will be a long time before I know what I have in myself." So that last quote was actually from Rain. She was talking to Moore. And this last quote in particular is really referring back to this Methodist Puritan Protestant upbringing. That it is actually rich in biblical imagery, even though nothing is capitalized. So I am is how God refers to himself in the Bible. He is also referred to as Father with a capital F. And the Bible states that men and women are created in his image, capital H for his. Murdoch packed so much religious imagery in literally 3 sentences, and they're not long sentences. He is asking the question, like, if you choose to break away from not only, say, this religious father, big capital F, also your convention, your upbringing. Rain has grown up as a painter in the shadow of her father, lowercase f, as this renowned painter. She is just coming into her own, and it takes time to figure out who you are. So this is an identity question. And how do you, or can you, break away from your father? Whether that be lowercase f for Rain or uppercase F for Moore. There are these strings attached, and both of these characters are struggling with those strings. Do they fully want to be separated from those strings, or do they want to completely just kind of give in to them? I'm going to tie these last 2 themes together. I think that they're tightly related. So throughout the novel, there's this ongoing conversation about what is the role of a painter, and can the painter, especially one who paints others' portraits or portraits of others, ever truly capture a person's likeness? I think this might have been my favorite theme in the novel, because I see that this could be an issue with not just a visual artist, but a novelist, a musician. How do you capture somebody's likeness, and can you ever separate yourself from what you create and create an objective view of somebody or something? And so from there, the other theme that's tied into that is, can you ever truly know a person, or will other people always remain an enigma? Because in order for you to properly paint somebody's likeness, you have to have at least some level of understanding. And if you really want to capture a likeness, you have to have a deep understanding of that person. And so how can you ever know that what you've painted has captured that true person's likeness? Painting a portrait is not just a matter of sitting down and painting what you see. Where the human face is concerned, we interpret what we see more immediately and more profoundly than any other object. A person looks different when we know him. He may even look different as soon as we know one particular thing about him. This quote actually pairs really, really well with the second section of Marcel Proust's Within a Budding Grove, because this question is also asked. You can never fully, actually, I think it paints a really, it compares well to the work as a whole in Within a Budding Grove, because you have our narrator saying people will always remain elusive. They change over time. As soon as you learn something about them, you learn something new. The more that you know about a person, the more things that pop up. So trying to know a person is always a moving target. The great painter is he who is humble enough in the presence of the object to attempt merely to show what the object is like. We all think that there is something which is what a person is really like, and that this takes some time to learn. Upon an ordinary material thing, we can look with reverence, wondering simply at its being. But when we look upon a human face, we interpret it by what we are ourselves. And what are we? So again, this is how the artist can never fully detach themselves from their piece of work. There's always going to be a piece of them that they're projecting onto whatever it is that they're creating. So that's it. Those are the themes that I decided to focus on. Again, like I said, The Sandcastle is my second Iris Murdoch novel. I read The Sea in 2021. I really enjoyed this novel. It's everything that I like in a novel. It's just Iris Murdoch has a way of writing directly and subtly at the same time. Her writing is not flowery, but it's somehow poignant. And I feel like her poignancy as a writer, her ability to create a scene in an environment is way more evident in The Sea. By the way, that one did win a Man Booker in the 1970s, the late 1970s. And the descriptions of the sea and this claustrophobic environment that the main male character is living in is just, it's so good. So for me, The Sandcastle didn't have that mood, that moodiness that The Sea has, but it's still good in its own way. They're two very different novels, but both of them are deceptively simpler than you would expect, considering that Iris Murdoch this woman is deep. If you listen to her old videos of her or recordings of her discussing her brand of philosophy, it is deep. And you have to really pay attention to her because you can easily get confused. She was an existentialist at some time, but she was at one time in her life, but not her entire life. And I can see in The Sandcastle how there was some of that existential crisis, that was existential malaise, if you will, that was seeping into the narrative just a little bit, but it wasn't heavy-handed. But you could read this as an existential novel if you wanted to. But again, I enjoyed the novel. It's just, she's quick to read, but she's rich in themes. It's not vapid in any way. I remember when Vintage Classics released this collection of six of her novels with these gorgeous artistic covers. And if you look at this brief synopsis, sometimes you're like, this sounds like a soap opera. It sounds like it's just a vapid drama. But again, or cheesy soap operas. That is far from the truth. She does like to write these very unsavory characters that get up into a whole bunch of shenanigans. But you realize that once you start reading it, Iris Murdoch is way more complex. I don't think that a lot of the synopses of her novels do her justice. I would consider her a genius in order to write this simply, but to write this deeply. I will definitely look forward to reading more. I have 4 more left. I went on and completed the collection because, again, in fairly honorable defeat, I'm glad I snagged it when I did, because now I have a hard time finding it anywhere. And so I snagged Under the Net. and the bell, because I found like they were starting to become a little bit more elusive. I don't know if Vintage Classics is about to start putting them out of print. Maybe they didn't sell as well as I thought. I don't know. Complete conjecture. But I'm finding them harder to get. And so I snagged them while I could. And I saw them going on eBay and some secondhand one-line bookstores for exorbitant amounts of money. And I was like, ain't no way. Let me snag it now. So I look forward to Iris Murdoch. But when I was reading the Sandcastle, more Iris Murdoch rather, but when I was reading the Sandcastle, I was just really kind of pining for the Sea. I think I'm also in the mood to read sea narratives right now. I gave this a 4 out of 5. And yes, I enjoyed it. It was good stuff. Have you read Iris Murdoch? And if you've read multiple of her works, which one is your favorite? And that is all. I feel a little scatterbrained. It's always a little bit... You have to get your groove. I only record videos once a month. I sit down and record 4 videos at a time. And then that way I have everything recorded for a month in advance, because I just do not have the time to do this every week or every other week. So I like to plan in advance. And so when you stay away from talking to yourself in a room for 4 weeks at a time, I have to get into the groove. I feel a little bit scatterbrained. So I'm sorry if this review was a little distracting in some ways. I hope not, but that is also what editing is for. Before I wrap up, please feel free to like and subscribe and leave me a comment. Also feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get into more bookish shenanigans. You will see on the split screen what my Instagram handle is, and I will also leave a link down below. I'll see you in the next one.